There's a moment that comes to all of us, usually when we least expect it. A moment when everything we thought we knew about ourselves, about our capabilities, about the world around us, gets shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. And we're left standing in the wreckage, faced with an impossible choice. Piece together the comfortable lie we've been living, or step forward into a truth so terrifying it makes our bones ache. The question isn't whether we're strong enough to survive what's coming. The question is whether we're brave enough to become who we need to be. This isn't about dragons, though there are dragons. This isn't about war, though war tears through every page. This is about the moment when survival stops being enough, when staying alive becomes less important than staying true to who you're becoming, even if that transformation burns everything you thought you were down to ash. It's about the realization that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one trying to kill you. It's the one trying to make you believe you're not strong enough to fight back. We live in a world that constantly tells us to play it safe, to stay small, to accept the limitations others place on us because challenging them is too risky, too uncomfortable, too likely to fail. We're taught that questioning authority is dangerous, that demanding the truth is naive, that fighting systems bigger than ourselves is futile. And so we learn to make ourselves smaller, quieter, more acceptable. We learn to survive by not making waves. But what happens when survival requires you to become a storm? Iron Flame, the second book in Rebecca Yarros's Empyrean series, published in 2023, picks up exactly where Fourth Wing left us. Breathless, betrayed, and standing on the edge of a war that most people don't even know is coming. But this isn't just a continuation of a fantasy story. It's an exploration of what happens when you survive the thing that was supposed to break you, only to discover that survival was just the beginning, that the real test isn't whether you can endure. It's whether you can transform. Rebecca Yarros didn't set out to write a simple fantasy romance. She set out to write about power in all its forms, the power others hold over us, the power we claim for ourselves, and the devastating, terrifying power that comes from refusing to be who everyone expects you to be. She crafted a narrative that asks uncomfortable questions about institutions we're taught to trust, about the cost of loyalty, and about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we most need protection from. What makes Iron Flame resonate so deeply isn't the dragons or the magic or even the romance, though all of those elements are woven through the story with visceral intensity. What makes it matter is that it speaks to something we all recognize. The moment when we realize that the world isn't what we've been told it is, and that speaking that truth out loud might cost us everything we have. Violet Sorrengail thought she knew what she was fighting for. She survived Basgiath War College. She bonded with not one but two dragons. She proved everyone wrong who said she was too weak, too small, too fragile to make it as a writer. She fell in love with someone who should have been her enemy. She thought she'd won. And then she discovered the truth. The Venin, horrifying creatures that drain magic from the world, leaving behind only death and corruption, aren't just stories told to first-year cadets. They're real. They're coming. And the leadership of Navarre, the very people sworn to protect their kingdom, have been lying about it for generations. They've been hiding behind their wards, sacrificing entire villages beyond the border, letting people die rather than admitting the threat exists. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting they're not as powerful as they claim. It would mean asking for help. It would mean change. Violet stood in front of the truth and made a choice that most people never have the courage to make. She refused to pretend she didn't see it. She refused to go back to comfortable ignorance. And that choice set her on a collision course with everything she'd been raised to believe, everyone she'd been taught to trust, and the entire power structure of the world she thought she knew. This is where Iron Flame begins, not with a victory but with a decision. The decision to fight not just for survival but for something bigger, for truth, for justice, for the people who have no voice, for a future that might cost her everything, including her life. But here's what makes this story cut so deep. Violet isn't starting from a place of strength. She's starting from betrayal. Xaden, the man she loves, the man she trusted with everything, kept secrets from her, devastating secrets. He's been part of a rebellion she knew nothing about. He's been working toward goals he never shared. And even though his reasons make sense, even though she understands why he did it, the betrayal still burns. Because love without trust is just another kind of cage. So Violet has to navigate multiple wars simultaneously. There's the war against the Venin, the existential threat that could destroy everything. There's the war against Navarre's leadership, who would rather let people die than admit they need help. There's the war within the rebellion itself, where competing agendas and old grudges threaten to tear apart any chance of unity. And there's the most intimate war of all, the one inside her own heart, where she has to decide whether she can trust again, whether she can love someone who chose loyalty to a cause over honesty with her, whether she can be both vulnerable and strong. This is the genius of what Yarros has created. She's not just writing about external conflicts. She's writing about the internal landscape of a young woman trying to hold on to herself while the entire world demands she become something else. Someone harder. Someone who can make impossible choices without flinching. Someone who can lead even when she's terrified. Someone who can love even when love feels like weakness. Think about what that means. Think about how many times in your own life you've been told to choose. Be strong or be vulnerable. Be a leader or be liked. Stand up for what's right or keep your head down. Fight or survive. Love or protect yourself. As if we could somehow split ourselves in half, as if being human wasn't about holding all those contradictions simultaneously, as if strength wasn't sometimes found in the very vulnerability we're told to hide. Violet refuses that false choice. She insists on being complicated. She's fierce and frightened. She's powerful and uncertain. She's in love and she's furious. She's determined to save everyone and she's drowning under the weight of that responsibility. She's learning to wield devastating power while grappling with the question of what power actually means. Does it mean the ability to destroy, or does it mean the wisdom to know when not to? Throughout Iron Flame, we watch Violet grow not by becoming harder, but by becoming more fully herself. She doesn't shed her compassion to become strong. She weaponizes it. She doesn't abandon her vulnerability to become a leader. She leads because she refuses to let her vulnerability make her cruel. She doesn't stop feeling deeply in order to make difficult choices. She feels everything and chooses anyway. This is where the story moves beyond typical fantasy narratives about chosen ones and epic battles. Because Violet isn't trying to become someone else. She's trying to figure out how to be herself in a world that keeps telling her that self isn't enough. That she needs to be tougher, colder, more willing to sacrifice people for the greater good. That she needs to learn to make peace with collateral damage. And she keeps saying no. She keeps insisting that every life matters, that the people beyond the border aren't acceptable losses, that truth matters more than comfortable lies, that she won't become the kind of person who can sleep at night while knowing she had the power to help and chose not to. Even when that choice makes her life infinitely more complicated, even when it makes her enemies more dangerous, even when the people she's trying to save don't understand what she's fighting for. Consider what this looks like in practice. Violet is training to become more powerful, learning to harness the devastating magic that flows through her connection to her dragons. But she's also teaching. She's sharing knowledge that the leadership once kept secret. She's training others in techniques that might level the playing field between the privileged and the powerless. She's literally trying to democratize power in an institution built on hierarchy and control. This is revolutionary, not in the grand, dramatic way that makes for easy slogans, but in the quiet, dangerous way that actually changes things. Because Violet understands something that most people in power never grasp. Holding on to power by keeping others weak doesn't make you strong. It makes you terrified. It means your power is conditional, dependent on maintaining someone else's powerlessness. True strength, the kind that can't be taken away, comes from lifting others up, from building a community where power is shared, not hoarded. But sharing power means giving up control. It means trusting others to make their own choices, even when those choices terrify you. It means accepting that you can't protect everyone, that sometimes the people you're trying to save will make decisions that put them in danger, and you have to let them. Because agency matters more than safety. Autonomy matters more than protection. The right to choose your own path matters more than the comfort of knowing everyone is safe. This is where Iron Flame gets really complicated, really uncomfortable, really honest about what leadership actually demands. Violet has to watch people she cares about walk into danger. She has to let them. She has to trust that they're capable of fighting their own battles, even when every instinct screams at her to step in, to take over, to use her power to keep them safe. She has to learn the hardest lesson of all, that caring about someone doesn't give you the right to control them, even when control feels like protection. Her relationship with Xaden becomes the crucible where this lesson burns the hottest. He kept secrets. He made decisions that affected her life without including her. He chose what he thought was best for the rebellion, for the greater good, without trusting her with the full truth. And he did it because he loves her, because he was trying to protect her, because he thought he knew better. But protection without consent is just another word for control, and Violet has to make him understand that. She has to establish boundaries in a relationship where the stakes couldn't be higher, where they're both fighting a war that might kill them, where every moment together might be their last. She has to insist on being treated as an equal partner even when it would be easier, safer, more comfortable to let someone else make the hard choices. This is where Yaros writes something that feels breathtakingly real. Love, especially young love, especially first love, comes with this terrible temptation to merge completely with another person, to let them define you, to make their approval more important than your own self-knowledge, to blur the boundaries between self and other until you can't remember where you end and they begin. And when that person is powerful, charismatic, experienced, when there's someone like Xaden who seems to have all the answers, who moves through the world with confidence you're still building, that temptation becomes almost overwhelming. But Violet knows, somewhere deep in her bones, that losing herself in someone else isn't love, it's erasure, and she refuses. She loves Xaden desperately, completely, but she won't disappear into him. She won't make herself smaller to make him more comfortable. She won't stop asking questions just because the answers complicate his plans. She insists on being seen fully, even the parts of her that are inconvenient, that challenge him, that demand he grow alongside her. This creates a romance that feels earned rather than inevitable. These are two people who are choosing each other, continuously, actively, even when that choice is hard, even when they're angry, even when trust feels impossible, even when loving each other means having difficult conversations, setting boundaries, admitting mistakes, and doing the painful work of actual intimacy rather than the fantasy of perfect understanding. And this matters beyond the pages of a book. This matters because we live in a world saturated with narratives about love that teach us all the wrong lessons. That love means never having to say you're sorry. That love means someone who completes you. That love means finding someone who makes you feel safe, protected, cherished. As if love were about being small and taken care of rather than being seen in all your complicated glory and chosen anyway. Violet and Xaden show us something different. They show us love as a practice, not a feeling. Love as work, not magic. Love as two people who keep showing up for each other, who keep choosing to be honest even when honesty is terrifying, who keep fighting for the relationship even when it would be easier to walk away. They show us that real love doesn't erase conflict. It survives it, grows through it, becomes deeper because of it. But here's where we need to pull back and look at the bigger picture, at what Yaros is actually writing about beneath the surface of dragons and war and romance. Because Iron Flame is, at its core, a story about institutions and the people who challenge them. About what happens when you're part of a system that you slowly realize is fundamentally broken, and you have to decide whether to work within it for incremental change or blow it up and rebuild from scratch. Basgiath War College represents everything we've been taught to respect about traditional power structures. It's old. It's established. It has rules, hierarchies, traditions that have been maintained for generations. It produces competent riders who are supposed to protect the kingdom. And it does all of this through brutality, through a survival of the fittest mentality that kills more cadets than it graduates, through maintaining power by keeping most people weak and ignorant. Violet could have accepted this. Many people do. They enter broken systems and tell themselves that once they have power, once they're in charge, they'll change things from within. They'll be the good ones. They'll use their position to make things better, and maybe some of them even mean it. But most of them discover that systems are designed to perpetuate themselves, that ascending within a hierarchy requires you to play by its rules, and that by the time you have enough power to change things, you've become too invested in the system to want to. Violet takes a different path. She refuses to wait until she has permission to do what's right. She starts teaching forbidden techniques now. She starts sharing classified information now. She starts building networks of trust and alliance now. She doesn't wait for someone in authority to decide she's earned the right to make a difference. She makes a difference and lets authority deal with it. This is dangerous. This is how you make powerful enemies. This is how you end up court-martialed or disappeared or dead. And Violet knows all of this. She's not naive about the risks. She simply decided that the risk of staying silent is greater than the risk of speaking up, that the cost of complicity is higher than the cost of rebellion. Think about what that means in your own life. Think about the institutions you're part of, your workplace, your school, your community organizations, maybe even your family. Think about the rules you follow not because they make sense, but because challenging them feels too dangerous, too exhausting, too likely to make you an outcast. Think about the injustices you witness and do nothing about because you're not in a position of power, because it's not your place, because you need to pick your battles, because speaking up might cost you something you're not willing to lose. Now imagine what would change if you stopped waiting for permission, if you started acting as if you already had the authority to make things better, not recklessly, not without strategy, but with the conviction that doing the right thing doesn't require approval from people in power. That sometimes, often, the right thing means directly defying those people. This is what Violet does, and it's why her story resonates so powerfully right now. In this moment of history, where we're all watching institutions crumble, where we're all questioning authorities we used to trust automatically, where we're all trying to figure out how to navigate a world that feels increasingly unstable and unjust. She shows us that you don't have to wait until you're powerful to have power. You don't have to wait until you're in charge to lead. You don't have to wait until you're certain you'll succeed to begin. But and this is crucial, Violet also shows us the cost of this choice. She's exhausted. She's overwhelmed. She carries guilt for every person she can't save, for every decision that leads to casualties, for every time her best isn't good enough. She struggles with the weight of leadership, with the impossible math of trying to save everyone when resources are limited and enemies are everywhere. She makes mistakes. She gets people hurt. She second-guesses herself constantly. And this is where Yarros writes with brutal honesty about what it actually means to fight for something bigger than yourself. It means carrying a burden that never gets lighter. It means making impossible choices where every option has a cost you can barely live with. It means continuing to fight even when you're certain you're going to fail, because failing while fighting is better than succeeding at looking the other way. There's a moment in Iron Flame where Violet has to decide whether to use her power to save someone she loves or to protect a strategic position that could save hundreds of lives. She has seconds to choose, and there's no right answer. Either choice means people die. Either choice means living with the knowledge that she had the power to save someone and chose not to. Either choice means carrying that weight forever. She makes a choice, and she lives with it, and that's the point. That's what heroism actually looks like, stripped of all the glory and triumph. It looks like continuing to carry impossible weight. It looks like making decisions that haunt you. It looks like choosing the lesser evil and hating yourself a little for having to make that choice at all. We need stories like this. We need narratives that show us the real cost of fighting for what's right, because the sanitized versions we usually get don't prepare us for what that fight actually demands. They don't prepare us for the exhaustion, the doubt, the crushing weight of responsibility, the way fighting for justice can sometimes make you feel more broken than doing nothing ever did. They don't prepare us for the fact that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, doesn't always bring clarity, doesn't always lead to victory. But they also don't show us what Iron Flame makes beautifully clear, that fighting anyway, despite all of this, despite the cost and the doubt and the exhaustion, is what defines us. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite being terrified. That strength isn't imperviousness to pain, but the capacity to keep going while hurting. That heroism isn't about being special or chosen or destined. It's about being ordinary and deciding that ordinary isn't enough, that you owe the world more than your compliance, that you owe yourself more than a life spent playing it safe. Throughout Iron Flame, we watch Violet grapple with her evolving understanding of power. Early in her journey, she thought power meant strength, the ability to fight, to survive, to protect herself. Then she thought it meant having dragons, being bonded to creatures of devastating force. Then she thought it meant having access to rare magic, to abilities most people don't possess. But gradually, painfully, she begins to understand something more nuanced. Power isn't just about force. It's about influence. It's about trust. It's about building networks of people who choose to follow you not because they have to, but because they believe in what you're fighting for. It's about inspiring others to find their own power rather than hoarding yours. It's about knowing when to use force and when to use restraint, when to fight and when to build, when to lead from the front and when to step back and let others shine. This evolution matters because it mirrors the journey many of us are on right now. We live in a time when traditional forms of power, institutional authority, hierarchical control, force-based dominance, are being questioned and challenged like never before. We're collectively trying to imagine new models of leadership, new ways of organizing ourselves, new distributions of power that don't rely on some people having everything while others have nothing. Violet becomes a model for this kind of leadership. She doesn't ask people to follow her blindly. She asks them to think critically, to question authority, to develop their own power. She shares knowledge rather than hoarding it. She admits when she's wrong. She asks for help. She builds coalitions across traditional enemy lines because she understands that the real divide isn't between different groups of people. It's between people who want to maintain unjust systems and people who want to build something better. And she does all of this while navigating a military institution that's fundamentally opposed to this kind of thinking. She has to appear to follow orders while subtly undermining the very structure those orders maintain. She has to play the game well enough to stay alive while refusing to let the game change who she is. She has to be strategic without becoming cynical, careful without becoming cautious, political without losing her principles. This is an incredibly difficult balance to maintain. It requires living with constant contradiction, constant tension. It means never being able to fully relax, never being able to trust that you're safe, never being able to stop calculating every word, every action, every alliance. It means living in the gap between who you have to appear to be and who you actually are, and hoping that gap doesn't eventually swallow you whole. And yet Violet manages it. Not perfectly, not without cost, but she manages it by staying grounded in her values, by maintaining connections to people who know her fully, by refusing to sacrifice her humanity on the altar of strategic necessity. She proves that you can operate within a broken system without being broken by it, that you can play by some rules while changing others, that you can be politically savvy without being morally compromised. But here's where the story gets really interesting, where it stops being just about Violet and becomes about all of us. Iron Flame is also about community. about what happens when individuals who have been taught to compete for scarce resources start working together instead, about the radical power of solidarity in the face of systems designed to keep us divided. Violet's squad becomes something remarkable. These are people who were supposed to see each other as rivals, as competition for limited spots, as potential threats. The entire structure of Basgiath is designed to pit cadets against each other, to make them believe that someone else's success means their failure, that cooperation is weakness, that trust is liability. But Violet refuses this narrative. She builds a squad based on mutual support, shared knowledge, collective strength. She teaches them techniques that make all of them more powerful rather than keeping those techniques to herself. She creates an environment where admitting weakness is safe, where asking for help is encouraged, where everyone's survival depends on everyone else's growth. This is revolutionary. This is what terrifies the leadership more than any amount of individual power Violet might possess, because a group of powerful individuals competing with each other is manageable. But a community of people who trust each other, who work together, who have decided that collective liberation matters more than individual advancement, that's dangerous. That's how systems actually change. And we see this playing out beyond Violet's immediate squad. The rebellion she's part of, the network of riders and civilians, and even dragons who have decided that the lies have to stop, that the sacrifices of innocent people can't continue, that the system has to change. This isn't about any single powerful person leading a movement. It's about a web of relationships, about trust built over time, about people choosing to link their fates together, because they understand that none of them are free until all of them are free. This is the model of change that actually works, not the great leader model, not the chosen one narrative, but the slow, difficult, unglamorous work of building community, of creating networks of mutual aid, of developing trust across difference, of choosing solidarity over self-interest. It's the work of convincing people who have been taught to see each other as threats to see each other as allies instead. And it's exhausting work, frustrating work, work that often feels like it's going nowhere. But it's also the only work that leads to lasting change, because systems built on hierarchy and control can survive the loss of leaders. They can absorb individual rebellions. They can co-opt movements and neutralize threats. But they can't survive when people stop believing in the fundamental logic of hierarchy itself, when people stop accepting that some lives matter more than others, when people decide that the system doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be replaced. Iron Flame shows us what this process looks like on the ground. It's messy. It's full of conflict, not just with the obvious enemies but within the movement itself. There are disagreements about tactics, about priorities, about how much compromise is acceptable. There are personality clashes, old grudges, competing visions of what victory would even look like. There are people who want to work within the system, and people who want to burn it down. There are people motivated by revenge, and people motivated by justice, and people who just want to survive. And Violet has to navigate all of this. She has to build coalitions between people who hate each other. She has to find common ground between competing interests. She has to convince people that their liberation is linked, that an injury to one is an injury to all, that they can't win by leaving anyone behind. And she has to do this while also being a student, a writer, a girlfriend, a friend, a sister, while also training, fighting, surviving, while also dealing with her own trauma, her own fears, her own doubts about whether any of this will work. This is where the story becomes almost unbearably relatable, because most of us aren't fighting dragons or learning magic, but we are trying to navigate systems that feel rigged against us. We are trying to build community in a world that profits from our isolation. We are trying to maintain our humanity while operating within institutions that seem designed to strip it away. We are trying to love and fight and grow and survive all at the same time, all while carrying more weight than any single person should have to carry. And like Violet, we often feel like we're failing, Like we're not strong enough, not brave enough, not strategic enough, not enough period. Like everyone else has it figured out and we're just stumbling through, making it up as we go, hoping that our best will somehow be good enough even though we can see all the ways it isn't. But here's what Iron Flame understands, what it whispers to us through Violet's journey. Everyone feels this way. Everyone is stumbling. Everyone is making it up. Everyone is carrying doubt and fear and the crushing weight of responsibility. The difference between people who change things and people who don't isn't that the former are more confident, more capable, more certain. It's that they keep going anyway. They keep showing up. They keep trying. They keep choosing to fight even when fighting feels futile. And they don't do it alone. This is crucial. Violet survives, grows, succeeds, to the extent that success is even possible in the middle of a war, not because she's special. She survives because she lets people help her, because she builds relationships, because she's willing to be vulnerable, to admit when she's struggling, to accept support even when accepting support feels like admitting weakness. There's a powerful subtext running through Iron Flame about the myth of individualism, about the lie we've been sold that strength means never needing anyone, that asking for help is failure, that we should be able to handle everything on our own. Violet could have bought into this myth. She has enough power to make a case for being a lone wolf, for handling everything herself, for not depending on anyone. Instead, she actively builds dependence. She creates a web of relationships where she needs others and they need her. She makes herself vulnerable to betrayal by trusting people. She gives others power over her by caring about them. And this isn't weakness. This is how she survives. This is how she stays human. This is how she maintains hope when everything seems hopeless. Because isolation is what broken systems want. They want us separated, competing, viewing each other as threats. They want us convinced that we can handle everything alone, that asking for help is shameful, that our struggles are individual rather than systemic. Because isolated people are easy to control. Isolated people internalize failure as personal rather than structural. Isolated people don't organize, don't rebel, don't threaten the status quo. But connected people, people who have built community, who trust each other, who have decided to link their fates, they're dangerous. They're powerful in ways that can't be easily neutralized. They can absorb losses that would destroy an individual. They can maintain hope when any single person would despair. They can sustain resistance over time because the burden is shared. Violet discovers this throughout Iron Flame. She discovers that her greatest strength isn't her power or her dragons or even her strategic mind. It's her capacity for connection. It's her ability to see people fully, to recognize their humanity, to build trust across difference. It's her willingness to be vulnerable, to admit fear, to let others see her struggle. It's her refusal to become so hardened by war that she stops feeling, stops caring, stops being capable of love. This matters. This matters desperately. Because we live in a time that's constantly teaching us to harden, to protect ourselves, to not care too much about anything or anyone because caring makes you vulnerable and vulnerability gets you hurt. We're taught that feelings are liabilities, that emotion is weakness, that the people who win are the ones who can make decisions without being influenced by messy things like compassion or empathy or love. And Iron Flame says, that's a lie. That's not strength. That's death while breathing. Real strength is staying soft in a world that demands hardness. Real power is maintaining your capacity for connection in systems designed to isolate you. Real courage is continuing to care even when caring hurts, even when the people you care about die or betray you or can't be saved. Violet embodies this truth. She feels everything: grief, rage, fear, love, guilt, hope. She doesn't try to turn off her emotions to make better strategic decisions. She lets her emotions inform her decisions because she understands that emotions are information, that caring about people isn't a distraction from the mission. It is the mission. The whole point of fighting is to create a world where people can live fully, love freely, be entirely themselves. If you have to become someone incapable of those things in order to win, what exactly have you won? This brings us to one of the most powerful themes in Iron Flame, the question of what we're willing to sacrifice for victory, and whether there's a point where the cost becomes too high. Violet is constantly confronted with situations where achieving a strategic objective requires sacrificing something precious, a person, a principle, a piece of herself. And she's constantly having to decide, is this sacrifice necessary? Is this the only way? Am I becoming the kind of person I'd be ashamed to be if I make this choice? These aren't abstract philosophical questions in the book. They're immediate, visceral dilemmas with real consequences. Choose to save this person and that position falls. Choose to prioritize this mission and those people die. Choose to tell the truth and trust is broken. Choose to lie and your integrity is compromised. There are no clean wins. There are no perfect solutions. There is only the messy, painful work of trying to make the least terrible choice and then living with it. And this is where Yarros refuses to give us easy answers. She doesn't tell us that Violet always makes the right choice. She doesn't suggest that there's some clear moral calculus that, if applied correctly, will lead to objectively correct decisions. Instead, she shows us someone trying desperately to hold onto her humanity while operating in conditions designed to strip it away. Someone making imperfect choices with incomplete information, and then having to live with the consequences. This is more honest than most fantasy narratives give us. Most stories about chosen ones and epic battles give us clear villains and heroic victories, and the sense that if you're on the right side and fighting for the right reasons, things will work out. But Iron Flame knows better. It knows that sometimes you're on the right side and you still lose. Sometimes you fight for the right reasons and people still die. Sometimes you do everything you can and it's not enough. And you have to find a way to keep going anyway. This is the heart of resilience, not the ability to avoid being hurt, but the capacity to keep moving after you've been devastated. Not the fantasy of emerging from battle unscathed, but the reality of carrying scars and continuing to fight. Not the illusion that caring less would hurt less, but the understanding that the pain of caring is the price of being fully alive. Violet gets hurt repeatedly in ways that would break many people. She loses friends. She fails missions. She makes mistakes that cost lives. She experiences betrayals that shatter her trust. She carries guilt that threatens to crush her. And she keeps going. Not because she's somehow immune to pain, but because she's decided that the pain of fighting is more bearable than the pain of giving up, that dying while trying to make things better is more meaningful than surviving by looking away. In the beginning of this exploration, we asked the question, what happens when survival stops being enough? When staying alive becomes less important than staying true to who you're becoming? Iron Flame answers that question through Violet's journey. It shows us someone who could survive by keeping her head down, by following orders, by accepting the world as it is. Someone who has every excuse to prioritize her own safety. She's young. She's been through enough. No one could blame her for just trying to make it through. But she doesn't, she can't. Because she's seen the truth, and once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the cost of the system, once you've looked into the eyes of people who are suffering because of lies you were told were necessary, once you've held power in your hands and understood that you could use it to make things better, you can't go back to comfortable ignorance. You can't pretend you don't know. You can't make that not your problem. And so you fight, not because you're certain you'll win, not because you have all the answers, not because you're somehow special or chosen or destined, but because fighting is the only way to live with yourself, because complicity is its own kind of death, because you've discovered that some things matter more than your personal safety. This is what makes Violet's story transformative rather than just entertaining. She's not a power fantasy. She's not someone who discovers she's secretly powerful and uses that power to effortlessly overcome obstacles. She's someone who discovers she has power and then has to figure out what to do with it, how to use it responsibly, how to share it rather than hoarding it, how to maintain her humanity while wielding something that could so easily make her monstrous. She shows us that power is responsibility, not privilege. That having the ability to change things means having the obligation to try. That you don't get to opt out just because it's hard, just because the odds are terrible, just because you're scared. You show up. You do the work. You make the sacrifice. Not because it will definitely lead to victory, but because it's who you've decided to be. And here, at the end of this exploration, we return to where we began. That moment of standing in the wreckage of everything you thought you knew, faced with the choice between comfort and truth, between staying small and becoming dangerous, between surviving and truly living. Iron Flame is a story about choosing transformation over safety, about deciding that who you're becoming matters more than who you were, about embracing the terrifying truth that you have power, that power comes with responsibility, and that responsibility means making choices that will haunt you, but that you'll make anyway because the alternative, looking away, staying silent, letting injustice continue because fighting it is too costly, is worse than any burden you might carry. Rebecca Yarros has written something remarkable here. Not just a fantasy romance, though it's that too. Not just an adventure story, though the adventures are breathtaking. She's written a meditation on power, on justice, on love, on what it costs to fight for a better world and why we do it anyway. She's given us a protagonist who isn't perfect, who doesn't have all the answers, who makes mistakes and carries scars and sometimes feels like she's drowning. And in doing so, she's given us permission to be imperfect fighters ourselves, to care deeply and make mistakes, to be scared and act anyway, to need help and ask for it, to be vulnerable while being strong, to carry doubt while moving forward, to be, in other words, human, in all the complicated, contradictory, beautiful messiness that entails. The question isn't whether you're strong enough to survive what's coming. You are, or you're not, but either way you don't get to know in advance. The question is whether you're brave enough to become who you need to be, whether you're willing to let yourself be transformed, whether you can stand in the fire of your own becoming and let it burn away everything that isn't essential, everything that isn't true, everything that isn't you. That's the real magic in these pages. Not the dragons or the battles or even the love story, though all of those are rendered with visceral intensity. The real magic is the invitation to step into your own power, to refuse the small, safe life you've been offered, to choose transformation even when transformation means pain. Because staying the same is its own kind of death, and some of us would rather burn. If these ideas resonated with you, explore more timeless wisdom at Great Books Explained.